good to be back here again in like 30, 40 minutes. So yeah, so if you look at the overall IoT market and you look at from the cellular technology point of view, right now most of the IoT applications are dominated by either 2G in India and a little bit of 4G Cat 1, what we are seeing. And we are also seeing a rollout of NB IoT based technologies right now, but all are mostly 4G based. With 5G coming in, obviously 5G network promises a lot of capacity, a lot of bandwidth, a lot of low latency promises. But at the same time, if you look at the 5G infrastructure, right, and the 5G modules which goes into the devices, those are still expensive. They are not at the same price point as 4G or 2G. However, that is where the beauty of the technology is, and now 3GPP has worked with a reduced capacity of 5G, which is called 5G RedCap. And eventually, with release 19, we might have a 5G eRedCap as well. So I would like to unpack what is the 5G RedCap opportunity for India. So maybe I can start with Nakshatra. If you have any thoughts on different application and use cases where 5G RedCap would be useful for India.
Thank you, Neil, and hello to my fellow panelists. See, one use case, which is a no-brainer, is fixed wireless access for a rural area, especially rural India. Because, see, RedCap device at any given point of time is 30 to 40% simpler than a corresponding 5G device. And when I say simpler, it actually translates into the cost of the device. So if you can get 100, 200 Mbps speed by a RedCap device over a 20 megahertz channel, why not? It's a no-brainer, right? You really don't need to invest in a heavy 5G devices. Another use case possibly could be education PCs in India, right? Where you, again, the speed is a factor. And you put a quality of service on top of it, you have surveillance, you have monitoring, right? So that's my thought on the use cases. But with respect to the adoption of RedCap, I'll just tell you, you already have a 4G CAT category in this, or CAT 1, CAT 2, CAT 3, and CAT 4. So is it like a 5G equivalent of 4G CAT 1, CAT 4?
Yeah.
On throughput, yes. But now what is introduced in this category is very different. It introduces a potential 5G features in this category.
Correct.
You will have network slicing. You will have enhanced positioning, good for tracking, right?
Correct.
And then once it becomes prominent, the important part is 5G will be treated as a single technology to address Industry 4.0, Business 4.0, and Consumer 4.0. You really don't need all of the technologies. Good for operators, good for operations, good for customer, very simple solutions.
Absolutely. So maybe I can move to Dharmender ji. What do you see from network infrastructure point of view, right, on 5G RedCap technology and how operators are ready for different use cases?
So I think first it becomes important to understand why do we require RedCap. So we got a 5G, okay? Now 5G, if you look at worldwide, almost 300 operators across more than 70 odd countries they have adopted. And the adoption in India, like the earlier presenters were talking, that India has become the country which has rolled out the 5G the fastest. Okay, so if 5G is going so fine, and if you see the IoT devices, currently IoT devices, the IoT industry is doing pretty fine. So why do we require RedCap? I think it is important for us to understand. If you look at 5G, 5G gives us ultra reliable, low latency, what we call URLLC. And of course, it's a reliable network, low latency, ultra high speed. I mean, I don't have to talk about 5G as such. If 5G is expanding, then why do we require another new thing in between? So RedCap is the reduced capability, as it says. RedCap, it's a short form, reduced capability. But why? Currently, what are the IoT devices we are working on? As the earlier panelists talked about, they are working on narrowband IoT. We call it NB-IoT, or we call it, like he said, Cat 1 or LTM kind of a category. Now, those devices or user interfaces, those require very less bandwidth, number one. Number two, think of a smart meter which is at your place. So, if you want a meter reading, you will send an SMS, it will give you an SMS. That is an IoT device which is working at your homes. But if you want that device to be slightly more smarter, okay, suppose think about a camera. okay, camera at a street light. If you want a video to be relayed back to a knock, then you require, the capability of 5G. But if I have to deploy a 5G, full-scale 5G on that camera, then the cost is going to be huge. The chipset of a 5G is currently costing anything between 60 to 80 dollars. So that means I cannot have IoT sensors, IoT devices, which have a cost component. So the RedCap, the release 17 of 3GPP, which is third generation partners project, which sets the standard. So release 17 talked about the RedCap for the first time, and now the new releases will come. There they talked about basically 4 things. So we are trying to address, the earlier speakers during the day, I heard them saying, where is the killer use case? We have been talking about 5G, but where is the killer use case? Probably this will become a killer use case. How? I'll talk around that. Now think, if I see now currently the IoT devices worldwide, almost more than 2 billion devices are currently in place. More than 2 billion. And if I look at the certain research, there are Informa, there is Omidia, there are so many analysts which have done some kind of research which talks about that these 2 billion devices will become 7 billion or more than that by 2030, 2032. If that is the kind of market which is going to grow, we definitely require some devices which uses some features of 5G, but the cost is less, so that the mass adoption happens. So there are 4 C's which talks about the cost. Cost is definitely a component. Consumption of power is very, very important factor for us, because all the IoT devices, the battery life has to be more than, say, 10 years kind of a, battery life is required. Cost, power consumption, capacity. If we're talking about, 2 billion currently going up to 7 to 8 billion, that means billions and billions of devices have to be there. So concurrency and capacity needs to be there, okay? And then comes the complexity. If the current device, if the hardware is so complex, software is complex, then IoT device will not, it will be simply a, your smartphone. Then it is no more an IoT device. Looking at all the 4 C's, then the release 17, the standards which talked about reduced capability, where we are saying certain, say bandwidth. Bandwidth, if I look at, the 5G, you can get 1 gigabit of speed. Ideal situation, you can get that. But in this case, probably, the downlink will be approximately 250 to 300 Mbps, and uplink will be, say, 120 to 150 Mbps. So that is the kind of, uplink and downlink which are going to be there. So we want these devices to be smarter enough to relay the data back to you, but at the same time, the devices have to be, made in a way that these are less complex and the power consumption is less, so that these are adopted, and we can massify. This can become a real use cases. And there are hundreds of use cases. Maybe I'll talk about it later on. Thank you.
Great. Maybe I can move to Mr. Tiwari. If you can talk about from Jio's perspective, where do you see 5G RedCap fitting within the strategy for Jio, and how, what are the use cases you foresee? Because you already have NB-IoT network, which you are rolling out. And with 5G RedCap, how do you see it expanding your capabilities in IoT?
Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. Actually, someone from, a previous speaker from Reliance Jio, they have very good narrated about how the 5G, this IoT business is proliferating and what way it is going to be extended. I would say 2, 3 things actually from this perspective, basically, apart from other angle, that enhanced RedCap and RedCap. Enhanced RedCap is going to come in, from release 18 onward, and that is a already evolving process basically to decrease the power requirement and all these things basically. But I feel that this RedCap IoT, RedCap IoT will definitely around perform by 2030. Total IoT business of that actually 70% will be from this segment actually, RedCap IoT. And Reliance is definitely, see the problem right now, someone in the morning actually in the inaugural session, someone mentioned that, sorry, someone in the morning actually mentioned that this total entire this thing business actually that is going to be expanded, something like that. So 5G RedCap in our geo portion actually. The problem is that right now, because these IoT devices has to work on sensors and actuators actually, and 3GPP having all this security and URLLC, EMABB, that is the foundation block actually. Their uses scenarios are, in 5G it is 3 and in 6G now they have conceived 6 uses scenario. So all these are very much befitting in our 3GPP devices, including IoT. IoT is part of that since beginning actually in the 3GPP. So, and as Mr. Shah also told in the morning, that is CTO Reliance Jio, that Reliance Jio business size, of course it is having around 40-50% of the consumer, but this thing actually that we are developing, trying to, all the stacks which are developed indigenously in the Geo actually, with all the IPRs actual regimes that is in the Reliance Geo, it is totally homegrown, home research, that kind of the equipment we had, and that is standalone technology actually. So we see that in Reliance Jio, NB-IoT or RedCap, whatever the case, in the 3GPP domain actually. And 3GPP domain, I will say, is really actually because it's a really orderly growth through the regulator worldwide actually globally. So scalability is there of economies actually. And once the sensors, actuators are developed to large scale actually, then the cost will come down and it will be deployed in every industry, everywhere actually. So that way, because in like in 2007 or something before that, when there was not smartphones basically available, till that time the proliferation was not that. But once smartphones came in the big scale actually, and with the reduced price, then only this 4G, 5G was really evolved. So that kind of scale is required, which I am sure that RedCap is capable to deliver. Thank you.
So, Dr. Kochhar, if you have any views on how this particular technology will evolve in India, because you work with all the operators and you also do a lot of consultation papers. So, have you discussed 5G RedCap opportunities in India?
See, it's a no-brainer that 5G RedCap has huge potential in India, and especially because the way 5G is growing and the markets it is addressing are mainly those markets where full 5G capabilities are not required. And India being a price-sensitive market, it is necessary that we economize not only on the financial prices, but also on the asset prices. So the assets which are required to be deployed should suit what is the requirement of the user. That essentially makes India a different market from the rest of the world. The developed countries may be requiring much more capabilities. We don't, not as yet. So therefore, I see a lot of potential here. Secondly, our 5G deployment is hybrid in the sense that it is standalone as well as non-standalone. And in that case, the coverage and the capability which is available to a subscriber will differ from area to area. And if you combine both the requirement of the subscriber and what is available as networks, 5G networks, then RedCap is the answer. Because that is what will provide what every subscriber requires. And not only in one device, in all sorts of applications, right? If we don't do this, then it is like killing an ant with a hammer. So that is not a desirable thing to do.
No, very fair point. And I agree with Nakshatra's point on the use cases as well. Low-hanging opportunities, obviously FWA, because right now, if you look at the CPE cost, right, are more than $150 right now, and for 5G CPEs, and that's why we see operators are being very creative about having outdoor CPE, which is 5G, and then indoor is Wi-Fi 7. But if you want indoor CPE, which is 5G in rural areas, right, you need to have a CPE which costs less than $100 or even $60, $70. So that is not going to be possible with 5G module going into a CPE, right? So with 5G RedCap, I think that's a big opportunity to connect the digital divide, right? So that is one opportunity which we see. At the same time, we also see connected cars being a good opportunity for 5G RedCap. Do you have any thoughts about that? Because most of the telematics units which are going into cars are 4G, Cat 4 or Cat 6.
Well, see, if there is something which is near real time, not real time, I think this technology can address that. And not only autonomous cars. See, you look at all the use cases we just discussed, whether it is FWA, whether it is sensor-based technologies, whether it is tracking, whether it is monitoring. You put them all together, you get a smart city use case. So these use cases, you cannot look at them individually. You build together, or probably you get a smart industry, right? So from that perspective, it's a good technology to have. It's a very good area that it is fitting in. And I'm sure once this actually get to some production stage, it will solve a lot of problems for 5G.
Dr. Kochhar, you talked about network slicing, and that is the biggest benefit with having a reduced capability, but a 5G capable module or 5G capable solution, right? So do you see enterprises also adopting 5G RedCap beyond the usual use cases we are seeing?
Certainly, enterprises have a varied requirement of 5G. And there are many enterprises who talk about private networks. Now, if there is no slicing, there can be no private network which is attached to a network. So slicing becomes essential. And without slicing, 5G is just an enhanced version of 4G. So therefore, to say that RedCap will work without slicing, then we might as well use 4G devices. They will fit the bill. So certainly, yes, slicing is required. And then edge computing and edge storage, that add a lot of value and that bring up a lot of opportunities. For example, a device which requires less storage and which can offload its storage as well as processing on the edge network will be extremely cheap compared to what we use today. And I think Jio is developing one of such devices.
Just to add on what Mr. Kochhar said, I completely agree with him. RedCap will have to prove itself to be a dominant player in the market. Otherwise, you can still live with 4G, Cat 4 or Cat 3, right? So that's where it has to come up either with a really killer use case unique to RedCap, shadowing all existing use cases, or it has to be really cheap.
And also, it makes sense to move most of the traffic from 4G to 5G, which is more cost efficient, right? Cost per bit is lower. So it frees up 4G spectrum also, which can be used for 5G, right? So can you talk about how you're seeing in terms of timeline of 5G RedCap? I know the modules have just come out, the chipsets have just come out, but in terms of rollout, I know you can't talk about it much, but if you can give us a directional guidance on where are you seeing any demand?
From a projection perspective, so I'm saying, currently, maybe second half of this year or next year, RedCap devices will be in the marketplace. And if you look at the estimates, I think, some of the worldwide estimates talk about at least, like he said, 70% of the, IoT will be onto RedCap, 70% of the devices. Out of that, RedCap will be around, say, eRedCap will be around 10 to 15%. The rest will be RedCap. Now, since I, in the first session, I talked about that I will speak about certain use cases. But before that, I think it is important to understand, since you talked about network slicing, okay? I'll just add a bit to that. Currently, we are saying 5G RedCap. That means it is using all the features of 5G. So that means that slicing can be done. I think it's beautiful that all the devices, all the RedCap devices will be sharing the same 5G RAN and core. So that means the network remains same. And then you have a slicing of the network on which this, so that means a smartphone or a RedCap device, both can coexist on the similar kind of network, whether we have done some kind of slicing or not. So I think that's a beauty. And then all the features like network slicing is there, then the forwarding positioning is there. So I think all those features can be used, okay? Now, coming on to the use cases and particularly from an Indian perspective, somebody talked about in the morning about the healthcare, telematics and all. So I think this becomes extremely important for a market like India, which is rural. So the data can be relayed back, and telemedicine, or we say telematics, that can be done. Similarly for farming, I think some pilots are being done in the farmlands of Australia and all, where they are looking at a typical what is the moisture, what is the soil, how the weather is going to play, and what is the kind of crops which should be done. I think for an Indian context, that becomes extremely important. Industry 4.0 or Industry 5.0, whatever we call it, I think all the sensor, actuators, and whatever we talk about machine-to-machine learning, I think machine-to-machine discussion, or even for that matter, Japan is working on, both Panasonic and Toyota, they are working currently on, looking at creating the smart factories. We have been talking about it from a 5G perspective, but with RedCap coming, the cost coming down, it is quite viable. It is doable. Similarly, in some European countries like, say Scandinavian countries, Finland, and they are discussing about, smart cities. So the next layer of smart city will be on RedCap. So when we say next layer, that means it is not the infrastructure which they have laid, but how do we manage that? And now we are seeing environmental, issues are coming everywhere. We are seeing it. It's reality now. So how do we ensure that we create more efficient buildings? Okay, energy efficient buildings. So that means we need to monitor the energy, the power grid also. We need to see what is the kind of gases which are being emitted from the building. What are the exposure which people are getting? So all those kind of things can be done, provided the RedCap sensor, the cost. You might be hearing the cost factor coming again and again. Because in India, if we want to see it massify, cost will become an issue. And that's the reason, if the cost comes down, then adoption of RedCap sensors, devices will be humongous. And then probably our estimates for the worldwide or Indian market, or say Asian market, we will surpass those estimates. This is my thought.
It's great. Our estimates are also pretty close to 40 million 5G RedCap in India and 160 million globally. So India will drive RedCap because of the low cost market it is.
Yes.
Right? By 2030. So maybe I move to Mr. Tiwari and talk about, we discussed briefly before, right? So in IoT, what we are seeing right now, for let's say utilities, we are seeing a lot of fragmentation in terms of the technology which is being adopted. We see LoRa, we see NB-IoT, we see Cat1. No one is using a standardized. So that does not bring economies of scale, to your earlier point. So what can be done where for some critical infrastructure, right, we need to have a single technology, like at least a 5G RedCap. So the entire ecosystem benefits, the costs go down. Do you have any thoughts on that? Because you have been in TRI before, so.
Yeah. Actually, I will just contribute what earlier slicing of 5G was also this thing. And here also it will be used in my this thing. See, slicing is just another actually, and if your for IoT sensors or for any particular use case, if you need a kind of different critical SLA kind of a level actually, where reliability and everything is something different from the ordinary network which is available to anybody else, user of the 5G, then actually that slicing may come to rescue you, actually, like that telesurgery and healthcare industries and power grid and all these things actually. Those requires critical these things. So for this purpose actually, I remember there is still open consultation for the point of view from the TRI. Recently, they have floated this consultation paper for defining the critical nature of the M2M communication, critical communication M2M. And when I was member T actually in the DOT that time also that file roamed so many times actually, because in 2019 and one interministerial group sat actually to define some critical component of the critical communication, M2M communication. So those things are still open. You mentioned the name LoRa also here, actually. That is also a kind of IoT services, but not fall in the 5G domain, 3GPP domain. LoRa is not there, actually. But it is quite cheap service. So all these things, criticality, I feel that regulator has to define what is critical services and what is other services. For the critical services, basically, the stringent parameters, quality of service, latency, and everything should be, sometimes, I mean, it can be defined, probably a range can be defined. But if critical services are defined for different sectors which really need, which are very critical, because suppose, if any service of IoT in the economy, actually 4.0, 5.0, a lot of things we are talking actually, and any disruption is there of this thing, that is going to impact in a huge way to the economy, to the nation actually. So even like fintech services and all these things which mentioned by Mr. Arun Kumar in the morning, it was very wishful thinking कि अंबानी जी का अकाउंट मेरे में आ जाए और मेरा अकाउंट उनके पास चला जाए. That was really, I was. So these fintech applications, banking applications, actually these are so critical actually that there should be a different kind of regulation should be there. QS, SLAs, everything should be defined, probably try. May intervene into this basically, because like there are other services for very small application. It is going, I mean, it is okay that if my meter reading, if it is not going today, it will go differently tomorrow, something like that. There is no that kind of urgency, but that urgency cannot be avoided in the critical sectors. So the consultation paper, which is still open in the domain of TRI, actually that definitely should come up. Sometimes people may feel that it is against the ease of doing business, because once TRI will interfere, then probably extra regulation may be against the intent of ease of doing business. That may be there. So that way it is required, because the services which are run on D-licensed spectrum, like 865 to 868 megahertz band, which cost last year in 2022, the similar band was being sold in 5G auction, was 3,940 crore, almost close to the 4,000 crore range, 600, 700, this thing. Of course, it is in 865 megahertz band. So this 3 megahertz band is D-licensed. LoRa is working, or many other applications are working in that. I remember there was a paper, actually, some request from some certain stakeholder that this band is heavily experiencing interference from uncontrolled emissions and all these things. So for the better operation of IoT, some 3-4 megahertz band should be D-licensed, new band should be D-licensed. Probably that request was between 915 to 935. That megahertz, 915 to 935, that is identified in NFFE for IoT applications. So there was request. How long? I'm sure if the government consider that request, after 4 or 5 years, that will again be, I mean, there will be a lot of interference. Then there will be demand from something, a fresh de-licensing. This is an unending process, basically. So that way, actually, regulator has to come into picture, government has to see all these things. And for the small proliferations of the IoT, this thing, because IoT is going to be the part of life, actually, as we are having this 1.5 GB data every day in my pocket with a lot of computing capabilities. So that is going to be to define even our lifestyle, basically. So that kind of regulation, that kind of interference from the government side, from the regulators, from the industry and all other stakeholders, that has to be there. All the critical services should be defined, basically, and then accordingly the industry will proliferate with an orderly growth, not the mushroom growth.
Yeah, fair point. So Dr. Kochhar, do you have any views on this? Like to avoid fragmentation, what is your view on that?
See, we from the industry, from COAI, have always maintained that it is the market forces which should decide which technology to adopt. As far as government is concerned and the regulator is concerned, they can lay down the ingredients and they can lay down how the service is delivered to the user. But how and where it reaches from the ingredients to the user, that is for the industry as a business case to decide what is required. And whatever they feel is more cost effective is what they will adopt. And slowly over a period of time, the rest of the competitors will drop off. We've seen that happening earlier also. Right? Same thing will happen here also. Now, RedCap certainly has an advantage of getting into the 3GPP fold with standards. That's a major advantage it has, right? Talking about use cases, can I say something on that? You know, everybody is talking about specific use cases as they're emerging today. See, when we rolled out 5G, we did not know what is RedCap, right? It has come in because there was a market demand. We suddenly realized that 5G capabilities are not required by everybody. There are a huge set of population which does not require 5G capability, but it still requires 5G. So that is how this emerged. Please understand, this RedCap is coming in few years after 5G was deployed, right? And therefore, its maturity will come subsequently. The use cases in blobs will be seen, but en masse will come later. By that time, 5G would have evolved to either 5G advanced or 6G. And that is where you will see the majority and killer use cases involving RedCap. And possibly by that time, some other standard will emerge. So this is the way the cycle will continue.
Yeah, Mr. Tiwari talked about fintech, and I think other use case, brainstorming about use cases, I think POS terminals, they're getting smarter, right? Mostly they were on 2.5G, right, before, or 3G, and now they can move to directly 5G, right? They can leapfrog 4G and go to 5G RedCap, right? And most of them are now having smarter like screens, right? Well, based on Android. So I think that is also a big opportunity because we have millions of terminals which are due for upgrade, right? So I think from standardization security point of view, I think it makes sense to bring them on the 5G network because that will consume more data as well in future, right? So
I'll just talk about, a bit since you talked about, that IoT devices. Since if the way industry and each one of us is forecasting are the way the worldwide, research talks about that this is how this IoT per se or RedCap or eRedCap is going to proliferate across the world. That means we need to have a very, very secure and safe network. So the only point which I wanted to add was that since it's 5G based, so all the encryption and the kind of security which we have in 5G, that remains there. So I think nobody should be worried about, like since you talk about POS machines and all, although they're still working on 2G or 4G kind of a thing. Another thing which is very important for us to see that what we are saying today or forecasting, that becomes a reality kind of a thing. I think then it is important that first each one of us, whether it is a developer, whether it is a TSP, whether it is IP, whether it is government, we need to collaborate. I think collaboration becomes extremely important to see that this becomes a reality. Number two, I think from my perspective, I think, do we have that kind of a skill set, the people who are skilled enough to handle these kind of businesses? I think that becomes another thing. And the local, currently we are depending, although there is a program by the government where we are thinking of, making the chips here only, okay? So recently we heard about that. But forget about the chipset, rest of the stuff. Are we creating here in India? Are we really looking at creating those kind of devices, maybe with the help of some technology help from abroad and all? So all those kind of things, complete infrastructure around RedCap devices, because we are discussing whether it is FWA, CPE or UE. So all those kind of things, if they are available in India, are being manufactured and the government is really supporting, so then whatever we have discussed today will probably be a reality.
That's a great point, and that was my next question actually, or next topic, since we have 5 minutes left, was about how this ecosystem, if we have Make in India, for the modules, for example. Now, if you see most of the modules which are used for 4G are mostly dominated by Chinese brands, Quectel or Vipocom. And obviously, we saw what happened with Israel and Hezbollah, right? So we don't want to repeat that, but obviously nothing against, it's just about if we can control supply chain manufactured in India for those modules, or as you said, for the devices, that would be a great...
Very valid point.
Yeah.
See, I mean, in the morning also that while setting the tone, Mr. Arun Kumar, I mean, that founder mentor of the ETTelecom and Times of India, he mentioned that what way this technological development we are going to set actually this unmanned aerial vehicles are there, drones are there, how they will communicate to each things, those things. As Mr. Khajuria already mentioned actually, what way we want, I mean, country want actually that, I mean, it is nothing, I mean, from this thing, but as a stakeholder from the geo also, or as a industry, we are also, we have to collaborate actually, but basically government, regulator and every other interministerial body, they have to decide what way they want, country want to proliferate and grow actually. 3GPP already provision all these challenges which Mr. Arun Kumar in the morning he mentioned actually, all these challenges. I don't comment anything about what happened about the pager chaos and all these things. That maybe, I mean, technology has always, every coin has two sides actually, and technology should not per se, I mean, it should be perceived as if it is this thing, it is to ease our life actually and way. But what has happened, that may be even supply chain compromise. It may be something different, spy kind of thing, something while supplying because it was a special order, that could have been done. Otherwise, in 3GPP, every release has take care of the every development, including security, including power reduction and everything. All the, I mean, earlier, ultra reliable, enhanced mobile broadband and massive machine type communication. These three were the pillar for the 5G. That was the use scenario. Now in the 6G, it is 6 use scenario actually, and something 3 positioning has been, I mean, so whatever has been discussed, this connection of the intelligence and all these things perceived in the 6G, that is going to be realized with full secured network and everything. Security breaches will definitely, because man is been leading ahead actually to find out the loophole backdoor entry. But otherwise it is all covered actually in 3GPP. So that way, this is, now comes, I mean, to safeguard our supply chain, definitely if it is homegrown, developed, on the same technology, if it is developed inside our country, in the safe hands actually, probably we can assume that it will be safe. But still, there are Jaychand also, and at any point of time, I mean, I will leave, I will go washroom, sometime I will miss, actually that can be tempered. So, I mean, but technology has nothing to do with that. Thank you.
Yeah, great point.
Just to give you my view on adoption of RedCap, okay, it is going to be slow. For the fact that, see, IoT industry or IoT sector really grows slower as compared to the mobile sector, right? So you still have 2G in use. That's where, and the IoT devices have a much longer life cycle. But it doesn't mean we shouldn't explore it. It's a good time to explore this technology, understand what use cases are going to leverage this technology best, and how can you future-proof yourself. So I believe it is at the right place at the right time. Operators are actually upgrading to pure 5G SA-based architecture, which is like the primary need for RedCap to work. There are a lot of OEM ecosystem coming in, while currently you only have 2 modem vendors. One is Qualcomm, other is MediaTek. And then you also need a software layer on top of it, you're talking, right? And operators are trialing. You are getting interest from the enterprise. Currently, I think across the world, there are 17 operators who are either trialing it or who has 1 or 2 commercial deployment for it. So the future looks bright to me.
That's great. So maybe the final question from my end, maybe a rapid fire, as I always do, which is use case for 5G RedCap which you feel is going to be disruptive, according to you?
According to me, yet to be seen. I don't think I can visualize it right now. We will talk about it 4 years down the line. When you have AI in the topmost, you have quantum there, and then we will talk about a use case.
Okay. Sir?
See, I tend to agree with what he's saying, but the point is, RedCap comes in when you require differentiated security, differentiated offerings, and that is where 5G is required. Like you spoke about slicing, etc. So today that pipeline is small because our IoT devices do not require differentiated security and services. But going forward, this will happen, and that is where use cases will emerge. And there will not be one use case, there will be multiple use cases. So you can't say there will be a killer use case. That will never come. It will never come. It will always be a plethora of use cases where different technologies, different standards will be used.
Which one you feel would be more impactful, considering 5G RedCap will democratize the 5G?
Coming from a defense field, I feel defense will be the biggest use case here, because the type of 5G network coverages will not be optimum.
Correct.
The sensor deployments will be very heavy, right? And therefore, I think that will be a use case which will emerge fastest.
Correct. For you?
So I'll bet on healthcare.
Healthcare? Okay. Yeah, wearables also might get...
So I think from an Indian perspective, why did I say healthcare? While the first use case, the first use case worldwide will be wearables.
Wearables.
Of course, it's wearables. There is no brainer. But I'm saying, looking at the mass population and the complexity of the country like us, if we are able to develop, work towards healthcare, this can be a game changer. I'm not saying from a revenue perspective per se, but from an Indian perspective, healthcare will be definitely. But otherwise, I mean, the jury is out. It's whether it is, fitness tracker, whether it is, sensors on your body.
Or even the ambulance.
Absolutely.
Right?
Wearable is going to be the first big use case across the world.
I mean, these are definitely, anything can proliferate, and health will be always a booming industry. But what I feel actually that with the advent of 5G, we were expecting that industrial revolution 4.0, that will be a big changer. But that scenario has not somehow, worldwide, globally, it is not only India, globally it could not be. And that is why I am sure that our regulator, which is a really excellent regulator, probably they have not yet been given full recommendation for their something 100, 200 or some odd figure for the private networks actually. Spectrum, private network, through administrative assignment. But I am sure with cutting scale of the economies and with all these things, if Industry 4.0 has not come, Industry 5.0 with the 6G definitely, I feel that may be a disruptive and game changer. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, everyone.